Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from here in, well, I'm in Australia at the moment, getting ready to moderate for Luke, who's going to be doing a presentation about permissions in automated testing, which is something that probably didn't matter some years ago, but it now is actually pretty critical by the looks of it. So Luke's going to cover different options and what the outcome of that is and where we're moving forward with permissions. Before we get started, though, we'd just like to do something different. If everyone can grab out their mobile phones and scan this QR code, we'd really like to get a bit of feedback because it's 5 years now RAP has been running, and we want to know what people think of it and where we should be heading next, changes we do. So this small survey, it's one of those really easy ones just to give us some numbers. Please, really appreciate if everyone could just grab your cell phone while you're watching. You can fill it in and click it as we're waiting here. So we'll leave it up for a little bit longer, and hopefully everyone is thinking. If anyone has an issue, they can just pop a message. We've got quite a few people suddenly joined, which is really great news. And if you can just pop out your cell phone, just quickly scan the QR code and fill that in, be very much appreciated.
Or later on the recording on YouTube.
Yeah, or go back on the recording later on. But really good because people tend to, you know, it's like if I ask you to do it now, there's a chance, better chance than you doing it later. And we really, you know, there's a lot of work goes in the background here, and we just want to make sure that it's all worthwhile. So I see a lot of attentive people right now. That's really good. So great. So let's move on. If you didn't get it, we can get it, but really that's the question. So the normal situation, we don't have mics because with too many people, we just can't handle it. Everyone getting in. So there's a quick Q&A box. If you've got a question, ask the question. Because of what Luke is doing now, it's very interactive. So if anyone asks a question, I'll be interrupting Luke immediately to try and put the question so he can do it in context as we go along. But if you've got any questions that later, write them down, put them into the box. I'll have a look at it, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Always remember, everything here is recorded. And if you can go to the YouTube Areopa webinars, if you look at our page there, you'll see recordings going back 5 years, and there's a lot of great information on there that can be very, very useful for you. So please use that, and remember to subscribe, of course. If you need to be reminded, it's best to subscribe to our newsletter. This will send you a list of all of the sessions as they're coming out, so you'll know when the next webinar is ready. Right, so we've got a list here. We've got a schedules normally full, 2 sessions a month. I won't go through them in detail, but this is the list of them. And of course, you go to areopa.academy, you can get the whole list of everything that is being presented. And remember the important things. If we would really love people to present here. As you can see, this screen's a little bit daunting because these are some very very well-known presenters with a lot of experience. But one of the things that Areopa was built on was people using it as their first chance to get a presentation. So there's a lot of people that are now doing presentations as a normal part of everything, but they get started on here because this is a very simple platform. You don't have the pressure of a lot of people watching. You don't have all of that business on a big open stage. If you'd like to get into presenting, this is a great place to start. And if you just want a suggestion, give us a suggestion of a particular seminar that you'd like us to run for you. There's always people that want to do them but don't know what topics. As always, thank you to 4NAV. It really does, it does cost money. It does take time. It is an effort. There's no cost to anybody for this. This is all paid for by 4NAV. So please have a go and think about them when you're looking for reports for Navision or BC. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Luke now, and as I said, any questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and I will interrupt Luke so that he can answer them for you. Okay, over to you, Luke. I'm muting my mic now.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks for picking up the role of moderator today so I can do this presentation. Yeah, welcome to everybody. Like you said, a little bit of my background if you don't know me, but probably you do. I'm here already for quite a while in this world as I think it was you, David, with Eric Ernst talking about dinosaurs. Well, I'm this dinosaur, but I'm so lucky to work with a lot of juniors as a teacher, trainer, but also as a colleague at 4PS. where I joined as a test automation lead over a year ago. And this presentation is a kind of result from an internal process that I've stepped into, and I'm going to present a couple of things internally also. So, there will be reference to my book, like Hendrik tweeted a number of weeks ago. I'm just doing presentations to sell my book. So shameless me. Yes, I will be referencing once in a while probably, but some things are to be found there too. But some things aren't to be found there. So that's why this presentation is here also. I'm going to discuss why. Why do we want to do this? What is the value of automatically testing permissions, or testing with permissions in your coded tests, or working with permissions? That's the why. Then the second topic will be what I started to call pillar 6 when I was writing the second version of my book, but eventually decided not to leave it in the book. I wrote a blog post on it because at that time BC 19 was getting out. It was not fully working yet, so I decided to take it out. So what is this test permissions, and what is around it? And then how-to options. What options do you have in your code to take into account permission sets that you build in your app, because that's what it's all about. And of course, at the end, there probably will be a Q&A session. It's not a session that is, in my opinion, fully packed, so that at 5 minutes to the next hour, we're hurrying to get things finished. So, but I might prove differently, but I think it's a relatively short topic. So why do we need to look at testing permissions? Why do we need to incorporate permissions? With testing, the test automation I always talk about is about testing the application. Yeah, so we verify if new functionality is working as intended. Yeah, that's what it's primarily about. But of course, I think most of us, maybe all of us, have been there in the sense of, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that all BC users, the users that are going to use it, are able to operate this new functionality, because it depends on the permission sets that have been assigned to them. And of course, not only the permission set, well, in the end it is, but it's also the permissions you give to objects, like posting routine code units. They have insert, modify, delete permissions on certain ledger tables, yeah, where the user doesn't have, except for read permissions, right? So that's what we need to check. The time I worked at Microsoft, it was too often, unfortunately, happening that we were releasing a new version, or that could even be a small thing like what we called a regX, a regulatory feature, a regF, I should say, where we weren't able to test with user licenses, because surely with new things, the user license were always updated later. So once the things were out, we could get a user license, but that was too late, of course. Microsoft has built things in the platform that enables us to test permission sets, in corporation, or in the flow through your processes. Yeah, so that's the why. Yeah, note that you can only do this with permission sets, objects, not user permission set defined in the database. So somebody as a person has gone to the permission sets page and created a new permission set. You can't access that from code. The same applies to the old, what is now as a type called extension permission set. Those permission sets that were defined in an XML formatted text, you could say. It applies only to permission sets that are permission set objects. Yeah, the logic behind, in my opinion, I have never asked to be honest, is that of course you need to move away from XML formatted permission sets. You need to use the mature things, the permission set. And yes, if you deliver an app, there should be permission sets with it. Yeah. And just for your remember this is a small example which I use in my demos. So I have a set, and that set is part of my app. And when I deploy my app, this one is inserted into the database, and you can use. I've set assignable to true, so you could also assign it to users. So you could say that's the why. Now, what is in the background or underneath in the platform? What do we have to our availability to work with permissions in our coded tests? And that's the first part is the test permissions property, which you can find as a property on a code unit, like test permissions equals like whatever subtype equals this kind of permission. But you can also set it as an attribute or permission on test methods. This is the link to the article I wrote. So I took this description out of the book and I published it as a blog post. So what about this one? Test permissions, for your understanding, if you go into a test code unit, this is what test permissions is. Yeah. So what do we have? We have 3 possible values. Well, 4, but this one only applies to test methods. So that's the default of a test method. It inherits the test permission setting from the code unit. Yeah, but you could discriminate between different test methods to give them different test permission settings. And yeah, you could say the code unit has test permission disabled, and then you could say I want to inherit it, and for the others I want to use restrictive or whatever. Yeah, but what about this? So restrictive is actually the default. So if you don't provide explicitly test permissions, it will be this one, and that's what I think everybody of us ran into when BC 21 it was, I think, but there's also something in my mind saying 22, but I couldn't get it to find on Yammer when it was first reported. My search on Yammer is someone broken, but this is the default. Yeah, this will mean that this is just a flag, and the flags actually denotes that we want the test runner to run in a restrictive context of permissions for the session I'm in. Yeah. Non-restrictive is comparable, but I get back to the difference after I discuss disabled. Disabled is not the default. Yeah. But setting this value will exclude any change of permissions. Yeah. So you're running as you used to run your test before BC 21. Yeah. There was not a runner implementing anything around permissions, so everything was ran within the full context of your account running the tests, and probably that's a super user, so everything was possible. Yeah, there is a note here. Otherwise, it will result in a runtime error. Actually, it is required to lower the level of permissions within every test to any permission set other than this one. Well, they say it is. I found something in the code that should do it, but I didn't have time to really go and debug it. I dived into it because of this presentation, but it was of lesser importance. There were other things I needed to get in place. For me, it still looks like those two are the same. I already reported it to Microsoft some time ago, and I still think it's not working. So it's something I need to go in. To be honest, at the moment, I don't care. I don't see a big value in this one, unless this really becomes more restrictive than that one, maybe. But at the moment, I only use disabled and restrictive. Yeah. Maybe with a question or whatever later on, you might show me or tell me something different, but this is what I know at the moment. Yeah. So this is just a flag. It doesn't do anything. Yeah. As said, you set it also on a test function. That means here on a test function, I can set here test permissions. Yeah. And I need to set it to, I think, test permissions this way, restrictive. Yeah, I hardly do that, so that's why I say I think it should be this way. But this is how you can set it on an individual test. Yeah. It doesn't do anything on its own. Yeah, so just setting the property doesn't do it. Well, you could say, but look, I changed from disabled to restrictive and now run my test run. That's because the test runner implements everything. So the flag denotes, waves to the test runner, hey, you should take this into account. So it's picked up by the test runner. And this is more or less a bit the flow that I made while I went through all the code again, preparing this session. So if I'm as a user on the test tool, and I probably need to refresh this. Yeah. So if I'm on the test tool and I select run test and all, or a single line, and I say run selected test, that could be the single test or a test code unit. Yeah, then run tests will be executed. This will call upon code in the test runner. Yeah, for those, just to make the story complete, you go to extension management, the test runner, that's the app here that holds this tool, right? And it includes more than just this page, etc. You can select a test runner here, and that's what is going to be handled here. So this is calling upon run test in the test suite management code unit. That one is going to call upon, given this setting, oh, this is the code unit I need to use to execute my tests. Yeah. So in the onRun of that test runner, it will call upon on before test run. Actually, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, that's right, true. This one, and here there is a call to here the test runner management, which is going to call upon on before test method run. By the way, this is not an event trigger, yeah, so not the publisher kind of thing. This is an old kind of trigger, like we have the onRun trigger and the onValidate. It's a trigger that can be added to a test run on before test and after on after test. So when a test is going to be run, this code is going to be called upon. Yeah, and in this code we see start stop permission mark. I'll discuss that later. What is important here, that here there's a publisher, and I didn't know to put it better than this one. There is no direct relation. This is a subscriber to this publisher, and this subscriber eventually calls here clear legacy libraries that is going to check, hey, is test permissions disabled? Yes, okay, just continue. Yeah, there's nothing going to be set. No, it's either restrictive or non-restrictive. Is going to call upon this code unit, which calls this code unit. Yeah, and in this code unit, there's another check, double check, you could say, but of course it's not disabled, so it jumps into start logging nav permissions. At that point, my permissions, I'm a user with this role. Yeah, I'm no longer the super user. I'm now runtime in this mode. Yeah, it's, by the way, done on the fly, and there's a DLL behind which does that in normal BC operation. If you change permissions on a user, the user has to log out and log in again, yeah, so that the cache is updated and that that user is done working with that set of permissions. If it would be disabled, although this check prevents it from getting there, but nevertheless, if it would get there, it would start logging permissions with no specific permission set, and then your permission set that applies to you due to settings in the database are applicable. By the way, you can never give somebody more permissions than they have due to the standard settings. Yeah, so if I'm not a super user, I can't get myself, my process, logging things for a super user. Yeah, it's always confined to the standard setting that I have as a user when I start the tests. Right. So there's an issue since BC21. I know that a lot of us ran into it, and it's this one. Sorry, the current permissions prevented the action. This message, by the way, has changed. It has become more user-oriented since BC 20, I think. 20, 21, 22, this message changed 3 times. So I had some tests verifying this message to the full extent, and I learned actually this way, and Microsoft said it, don't test the whole message. Test important part, like it's about permissions, table data, insert. Yeah. So make 3 asserts on this one to see, okay, that's in it, that's in it, that's in it, and then it's logical. There's, of course, some holes in between, but checking the whole message, they say, well, we might change the message again. So don't bother too much. Nevertheless, what was the reason behind this one? So we all had test code units, well, probably with no test permissions property set explicitly, which meant this by default. Yeah. And if you don't set any permissions, then you don't have permissions. Like this example is from my book, where the business case lookup value is introducing a new table, lookup value table, and I'm creating a record in it. Well, if I don't have insert rights, I just run them with restrictive setting here, meaning that D365 full access permission set, as you might recall from the flowchart, is set on my run, and then it doesn't include this new table, of course. So the reason is your test code do not have test permissions property set to a value, thus it's using the default restrictive. But I'll get back to this short cut on the solution. Set it to a disabled. Yeah, that's probably what you did in the past anyway. Well, you didn't do disabled, but there was nothing changing the permission sets of your account. So it was by matter of fact, it was running as disabled. Or what you could do is set it to restrictive and add a permission set to extend this Dynamics 365 full accessing. There's another option, and we will discuss this, setting test permissions in each code unit. So, some technicalities. As already said, it does only work with permission set objects. I wasn't fully aware, but when I started to incorporate this in version 2 of the book, I ran into it. I thought, let's quickly create one in the base in the application in BC itself, and let's use that before just as a short check. But then it doesn't find it. Yeah, so it's not going to pick up any permission sets that are not of the type system. Yeah. There is a DLL in the background that, let's say, has a number of methods, of course, that we can directly and indirectly access. Let me take a sip here. And it enables on runtime to change the permissions of the current session. Yep, it does not change anything in the setup of the table. It's just, you could say, in cache, changing things. This means a number of things. In the first versions, we needed to incorporate that test helper.dll, and so we needed to create a .NET component so we could access that thing. Well, I don't know exactly. I think it was from version 18 or 19, around that time, that Microsoft added an app called Permissions Mock. Yeah, so here, if you're using a Docker container with the parameters test to include test toolkit, include test libraries only, permissions mock will be there. It might even be that it's default that it installs, but it's needed for your testing. Yeah, this is a wrapper around that DLL, and any code is referencing the methods through this app. Yeah. Of course, being a .NET component, that means that you can run those tests only on-prem. Yeah, there's a lot of questions always popping up on Yammer or whatever. How can I run my tests in the sandbox? And we're not saying it's bogus to do that, but there are a number of things why I wouldn't want to do it, and this is one of them. Yeah, if you're running your tests in a pipeline, it's not a sandbox; it's an on-prem installation, although it's a Docker container, but it's on-prem, and the target of that app should be on-prem. Yeah, of your code that's addressing this DLL. Around this, use library lower permissions. Library lower permissions, and I'll open up a project that shows them, has 4 main methods. It has a number of methods more, by the way, but this is the most important set of tests. And let me open up here. So test libraries. If I open it up in VS Code, here, this is this library you see start logging nav permissions. There is an overload where you can explicitly say which permission set ID you want to use. You could see in that flowchart that there was one call with a set and one call with nothing. And then with nothing is actually what this will also call. This is just starting the logging. So it's more or less instantiating that DLL or that object in the DLL, and is pushing permissions set for your user. So that would be D365 full access, for example. And there are other ones like setting this one, so you could push this one. If you do a push permission set, it means that's the set you start with. If you use add permission set, and might maybe just here jump here this way, this one, if permission mock has not started, it will exit, but if it has, it assigns an extra set to the user, to the account that's running the test. So start logging is just more or less to instantiate the DLL, start logging your permissions, and then with start logging, it will push permissions if you use the overload with a role ID, and otherwise you can push them. So you can also control it. In BC19, this was not run default by the test runner. That's since BC21. So in my book, you will see, and I'll get to that one to sell it shamelessly, you could say, is that this one is it was needed in all the versions to start logging the thing, as the runner was not doing that. Nowadays, this is done by the test runner. I don't need to bother. I can just add or push permission set. Okay, then the how-to part. So, how do you say? There are three options. I was searching for a word, but didn't get to it. There are three options how we could do this, how we could include this in our tests. And those three options are these. We can control permissions per test run. We could control permissions per test code unit. We could even control permissions in each test. And those who have been working with me with my book, they know the term fixture. The first one is a parallel with pre-built fixture, although it's not pre-built fixture. Two is a parallel with shared fixture. The third one is a parallel with fresh fixture. In my courses and in my book, I discuss it, and I discuss fixture mainly as the data setup part. It's not just data setup part. It's just the environment, setting up the environment in which you want to run your tests. So setting the work date is not really data. It's more or less a state of your client. Making parts of a page visible is not data, but it's the state of the client. A lot of standard Microsoft tests fail because of that. Those things not rolled back. But nevertheless, this one could be like, can we per test run set a test set, add a test set to the standard D365 full access? So I only need to do it once and it applies to all my tests. The second one is, can I do that per code unit? And the third one is, can I do it specifically as parts of my tests, steps in my test? And you can. There's one major note to be made, and well, no, let me demo that later. If we go into the first one, the thing here is, unfortunately, well, we can't do much about this at the moment. This is the place where we would like to add our set to extend D365 full access. Unfortunately, in the code, there is no publisher there. There is a publisher here, but if I would subscribe to the publisher on before test method run, I would be competing with the Microsoft code. And then it just could be the case that, well, I'm lucky, I'm the one who's executed first, and then But then, no, I'm not lucky because then Microsoft code is executed for it and it will redo everything. Yeah, might be lucky that no. So I'm not lucky. I need a publisher here. And I came across this last week as part of my investigation for this session, but also for 4PS needs. So I already discussed shortly with Nicola Krika, and yes, he agrees that's a valid thing. So I'm going to create a pull request. I hope I get it done this week, but then we would have a publisher here. I haven't explicitly thought about the naming, but it would be something like on after start logging nav permissions or something like that. And then it should only be applicable for this one because I don't want to extend this one. I would be able to extend this one. Yeah, so no example here. So that's just what it is. We can't extend it at the moment. Yeah, or I could maybe replace this whole library, etc., and not. But then I need to change test libraries, excluding this these two code units, etc. That becomes too complex. So I didn't went down that road. The second one is control permissions per test code unit, and I've got, let's say, a demo on this one. So here I have a project with a test and an app, test app and an app as I call it. And in my app, I have one object, just a simple one, a table which is called test table. Yeah. And I have a permission set called test permissions, just simple one. I've put this already on GitHub, but I was working still on it. I'll show you, and I'll put a link when I'm going to publish the recording. So my code, my app code. And then my test code is about, okay, I want to be able to run a test that creates data in that table. I'm not bothering at the moment about verify, etc. This is unlook like, you could say, yeah, I'm always about given when then, etc., etc. This is just a technical demo. So I want to be able to run this code and that it creates a record in that table. Yeah, I do have an initialize. There's a lot in it, but it's nothing related to what we're doing here. It's this standard structure of 3 publishers. The is initialize check and is initialize turn to true once initialize has been run. I reckon that most of you know this pattern. So if I run this one, it's disabled, so I have all rights to do this, so I can run it and it should pass. Great. Yeah. If I would put it to restrictive and I have the same code here, it's exactly the same except for the property test permissions, I will not be able to run it because I run with restrictive, and if you recall the flow chart, it will set my permissions context to Dynamics 365 full access, right? So yes, if we're going to run this, and not sure if I did deploy it last time because I have different versions, but if I run all my tests, you should see the first one succeed and the other ones exactly the error message I showed you, the BC21 issue. Sorry, the current permissions prevent the action. Table data, test table, insert, test permission, test app. Well, it's the full context, yeah, where it happens. So I'm not able to run this. So what do I do? Okay, let's go into this branch here with proper permissions. So now and the non-restrictive is more or less the same. So I'm not going to explicitly jump into it. So what I could do is in the initialize call library lower permissions. Actually, I don't know why I added the word test because the code unit is called lower permissions, but okay, it was too late to let's say fix that. And I'm adding to D365 full access my permission set. Yeah. So have a look what happens if I deploy this one, and you wouldn't be surprised, I guess, that if I run these tests, yeah, now everything passes. Yeah. So yes, Luc was running. My account was running the test with Dynamics 365 full access, and because of the restrictive, non-restrictive setting, I wasn't allowed to create data in that new table. But now I have extended, added another permission set to me as a user, and now I'm allowed to extend this. There's, however, a challenge, and that's something that's good to show here. What is the challenge? Well, the challenge is what happens if I have two versions, two tests actually, more in this case doing exactly the same. And I'm calling here the library of the initialize, and only the first time the permissions, test permissions FLX set has been added to me as a user. Okay, you might expect that the second test will pass, but that already more or less tells you that it wouldn't be that way. So I created for everything a double test version of the same thing, and I run it, and I see, sorry, the recurrent permissions prevented this to happen. There was something in my code that I apparently did not fix because of this one. I did fix it, if I'm right, in the other ones. But apparently what happens, this permission set added in the context of a test, that's the scope. So it's reverted when I get to a next test. So I can't put it here to happen once, but sorry for that. I need to let it happen with every test. So a solution, the first solution would be this way. So I put it up front. So it happens all the time. Even if is initialize is true, it will always execute this part. So let's see what happens. This one wasn't fixed. The thing is, I'm using any alphabetic text, and somehow I need to set a seed to change it. I was a bit surprised about this one, but okay, I'll learn about it. But that's not the part we want to discuss. What I did right now, that for each test, I'm going to add the permission set. So let's say it reverts back to the pre-built fixture kind of setup, so that with the test runner, it will set the bigger scope to Dynamics 365 full access. And the smaller scope is set per test. So I can't do this generically inside here once. No, I need to do it with every test run. Of course, the solution then could be, I don't want to put this in each of my initialized, the ones that use restrictive or non-restrictive, those code units, but I can also do it this way, that I'm putting it no longer here as a comment, or as it's now a comment, as a line, but that I create here a subscriber to my uninitialized, and I can then tweak it also to the need of the code units. So in this case, the caller code unit is the one restrictive and non-restrictive. So let's get that adding a permission set for the one running or the other, and this is called on test is initialized. So with each test, the initialize is called, and then this one is adding a permission set. That's this one. How about each test? Well, actually, you could say this is also doing it for each test. But this is more or less, it's not really shared fixture. You're doing it every time again, but you're doing it generically for each test. So it's somewhat promoted. In the end, you could say every time for each test, your test permission context is set there. How about specific things on a test? So I have this one, challenge 2, and challenge 2 is about this one here. So challenge 2 is about, I want to be in control during my test run fully of what's happening. So here I've added start logging nav permissions, and yes, you will see in my real implementation that it will be embedded in a helper method, etc. I always say this shouldn't be here, but for the technical demo. So what am I doing? Here I'm creating a table, and I have test permission disabled. So as I'm a super user, you might argue or wonder about, but yes, I'm a super user here in this environment. Yeah, just check, double check. This is the only user, and then I need to be the super user, of course, as we all know here. So I'm super. Yeah, just check, double check. So as super, I'm allowed to do anything. I'm not restricted to through any permission set. Yeah, but let's say I lower test permissions, so I'm starting logging again with this set. Yeah, you won't be surprised that this test is going to fail. The first part will happen, but the second part will fail because I don't have rights then anymore, permissions anymore to create that thing. So let me just update everything to be sure. I'm running only the first code unit. That's this example, and you see, sorry, the current permission prevented. Yeah, so this here is the issue. Yeah. So, but that's a known issue. I mean, that's what I want to do. This is forced. I want to set up data, just do everything, and now I want to run some code. The when part, the when part would be like, are you now able to execute things with those permissions? No, I'm not. I cannot create the test table. So what would then be the solution here? The solution here is now here control the exact permission set that I need to be able to do this action, this when thing or whatever. Yeah. So at this level, I'm in full control of the permissions that are applicable, are applied to this flow. Yeah. So the third option is about I can go into my tests and be in control of what's happening in the flow of my test. Yeah, if I would get that subscriber from Microsoft and I subscribe to that, that applies to all the tests, right? I can do the thing which I showed you with the publisher subscriber to my on test initialize publisher. I can more or less control it for the whole code unit with one subscriber. Great. Yeah. But I can also do this, and this can always be overruling. Start logging enough permissions will restart the logging and will push, as I showed you in the code. I think I can show it here too. Yeah. It will push this permission set, which is then the only confinement of your permissions. Yeah, nothing more, nothing less. And of course you can add to it, and that's what we do here. So I'm extending that set, the 365 full access, with this one. Yeah, so this way I can control it. Of course, you could wonder, do I need this? For those that have the book, and I'll open up this chapter 8 code, which you will also find on the GitHub repo of the book. Here I have examples of testing permissions, and you could argue, should we do it that nitty-gritty? Yeah, so I just picked up some scenarios. So I'm creating a lookup value without permissions. So I'm full base starting permissions. That's calling this one here. Yeah, start logging for that. And I made a mistake in the book that I used business full access. I asked Microsoft, maybe I wrongly read what they answered to me, but I thought they answered that this was the set they were using, but it's not this one. It's not the boost business full access, but the full access only. Nevertheless, I'm starting with that permission. I'm creating a lookup value code. I'm asserting an error, and I'm verifying that indeed I'm getting here an error, which includes the word permissions, table data, and the permission type insert. Yeah. So in the book, it's let's say focused on, but that was the more or less the only possibility at that time. BC 19 just coming up, to control and start the logging yourself in your tests. Now you could do it at a higher level, but then it applies to everything happening in your code unit. Yeah. So that's actually the story. We're nicely on time. Maybe it feels like we're too early, But that's what it's about technically. Yeah. So you can set the permissions under which you're running your tests. At 4PS, I started to change test permissions disabled to restrictive, and I started to add this this publisher here, which I had not in this project, but here. So here, this publisher I added to us, where I referenced a base permission set that had read, insert, modify, and delete rights to all tables. And yes, quite a number of tests succeeded, but quite a couple of them failed. Why? Well, apparently there was initialize method not called in a test method. Could be in all the others in the code unit, but not in this one. That's one thing. I didn't investigate everything into detail, but some quick browsing through code, I think there are some tables missing in that basic set, so people did not add them, and it's something we got into the last number of months that the developers should provide and update permission set that we provide, and that's unfortunately not the first nature of developers, I think, in general. On the whole, it's done quite well because major part was succeeding, but or it was half. The other half, I think we need to tweak that to get that working. So should we be testing like this example here, that we're going to test on every object? Well, I think that's going to be too tedious, too much work. Could be in specific cases, or when you're adding new things that you really want to check that, or very important restrictions that are set. But in general, it should be like your test for a certain area should be able to run with this set of permissions. Yeah. And in my example, this simple example, my tests should be able to run with this set of permissions. Yeah. Okay. So, are there any questions?
No, we haven't had any questions at all, actually.
Oh, so it was clear, or it was boring, or whatever. No, but
No.
yeah. So if that's the case, now we're at the end, or if somebody steps in right now with a question, or if you have a question, David.
No, it's as I said. I mean, my question at the beginning was why do we need this, and what does it add? And I think that you answered that. Because I remember in the old days, the only way we had to really test permissions is we'd run through the code coverage and we'd pull that out in the text editor, then it gave you the list of the permissions you needed. But you never really knew, because there might have been a function that you never ran, so in the test, so you never missed it, or there could have been an indirect permission.
Yeah.
So how does this help us to get there? And I can see it just makes sure we actually did it right.
Yeah, the simplest approach would be option one. If you could subscribe to that Microsoft code and add your basic set for it, that could be something. Could be more, how do you say, more in detail that you want to check. You could have different sets, of course. One for a super functional user, one for a specific role, like, I don't know, in standard sales order processor, and it could be very confined, or that you have only task-oriented kind of things like creating this, creating that, posting that. And then if you have an overall thing that includes those sets, that at least the processes that you're validating with your test should be able to be run with that set. And that's something, of course, that's something you need to grow into, but it's possible.
Yep. Okay, so Arthur van Vugt has said it was very clear. Peter Congen has said, yes, it's all very clear. Thank you.
Great.
And again, Arthur has said thank you to you and me for hosting their webinar. You're very welcome. We really like to hear things like that. Thank you.
Great. Well, then it's a bit shorter than other times, but I think it's was worthwhile to do. Thanks everybody for being here.
Okay. Thanks everyone for joining.